Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo-published game. The next game is Famicom Detective Club, The Missing Heir. Oh boy, here we are, another one of the big Famicom Disk System adventure games. I talked about this a lot in my video on New Onigashima, but for those of you who might not have watched it, these games were a bit of a daunting task for this challenge, since they didn't have fan translations due to the difficulty of patching them. However, I was in luck. Sudgy, my brother, is learning Japanese, and he decided to translate all of these games for me. So, once again, he created a Lua script that I could use to display all of the text in English. These scripts are available to the public, so you can use the link in the description if you want to try them for yourself. I want to thank Sudgy once again for being such a huge help in this challenge. Alright, so, how did Famicom Detective Club come to be? Well, before I go into this game, I want to briefly touch on another game that had a clear influence on Famicom Detective Club, the Portopia serial murder case. Portopia was a Japanese adventure game released originally on PC systems in 1983, although it also received a Famicom port in 1985. The game was published by Enix, and it was largely the creation of Yuji Horii, the man who would go on to create the Dragon Quest franchise. While Portopia never made its way to the West, its influence in Japan can be felt all over the place. It defined the Japanese adventure game genre, and while the West often calls all adventure games from Japan visual novels, Portopia's influence eventually led to the formation of novel-style adventure games in Japan too. Additionally, The Legend of Zelda's Eiji Aonuma said that it was one of the first games he ever played, and Hideo Kojima has cited it as one of the games that got him interested in working in the industry to begin with. It's also clear that Portopia had an influence on Nintendo during the Famicom era. I think it's likely that Famicom Fairy Tale's New Onigashima took some inspiration from Portopia, but Portopia's influence is especially clear in Famicom Detective Club, The Missing Heir. According to Famicom Detective Club's director, Nintendo veteran Satoru Okada, the game started as a proposal not from someone at Nintendo, but from Tosei. Tosei was a company that typically was contracted to do programming work, and they often went uncredited. It's a bit hard to track down what games they actually worked on, but at the very least they appear to have been involved with Nintendo on Kid Icarus prior to this. Now, they didn't show up in the credits for Famicom Detective Club, but curiously, they were listed as copyright holders for the Wii Virtual Console release, so they definitely appear to have been involved with this title's creation in some form. Anyway, this proposal from Tosei was initially called Boy's Detective Team, and it was apparently partially inspired by an American PC game that involved a circus and featured an amnesia plotline. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what game Okada is referring to here, so if you have any ideas on what this 1980s PC circus amnesia adventure game from the US might be, let me know in the comments. My best guess is that it might be the 1986 adventure game simply titled Amnesia, but that game takes place in New York and not in a circus. Maybe Okada just misremembered some of the details. Anyway, the proposal was shown to Nintendo's Yoshio Sakamoto. He wasn't super impressed with it, and he didn't think it quite felt like a game. Now, Sakamoto had played the Portopia serial murder case previously, and he was blown away by it. It made him rethink what sort of interactions could be turned into a game, as he previously thought of video games strictly as action games. Sakamoto suggested that the proposal from Tosei be turned into a proper adventure game, and his proposal was given the green light. Apparently, they actually tried to get Shigesato Itoi, a well-known writer in Japan, involved with the game, but when the team met with him, Itoi was so enthusiastic about his own idea for a game that they sent him off to a different department at Nintendo instead. I wonder if we'll see what game he wanted to make later on. Anyway, the story ended up being largely written by Sakamoto himself, although it was still based on the outline provided by Tosei. This was apparently Sakamoto's first time ever working as a writer, although he said that he loved to read as a kid. He also said that he was really into movies, and he really liked the Italian horror film director Dario Argento. Sakamoto has stated that he likes to include certain suspenseful elements in his stories, something we'll see in both the Famicom Detective Club games and even in the Metroid franchise as he starts to take control of it. Sakamoto made an intentional effort in this game to make the music fit alongside the suspense and atmosphere. On that note, I don't want to spoil too much, but this game does feature a few pretty shocking scenes, so just a fair warning, if you were coming into this expecting a typical happy-go-lucky Nintendo game, you're not going to find that here. I'll put the content of these scenes in the description so you can use that as a guide if you were concerned about it and don't care about the spoilers. Anyway, in Sakamoto's initial draft, he named the game The Village of Corpses, but eventually they landed on the title Famicom Detective Club, The Missing Heir, a name that will make more sense as we take a deeper dive into the game. Like New Onigashima, the game was launched on 2 double-sided discs, although apparently getting the game to fit was still a struggle for the team. The title ended up launching exclusively for the Famicom Disk System in 1988 in 2 parts, although I'm considering them both as one game for the sake of the challenge. I'm not able to track down any sales numbers, but regardless, Nintendo gave the green light for a sequel not too long after, and I'll cover that one more in the future. Now, similar to Nintendo's other FDS games, this one was never brought to the West, at least not the original Famicom Disk System version. The games did eventually get remakes on the Switch that were translated to English, although I won't be playing those in the challenge for a long time. Nintendo of America spokesperson Howard Phillips said that unlike New Onigashima, which relied heavily on Japanese folklore, Famicom Detective Club might have stood a chance in the Western market. However, translating a game of this scale was no easy task, and with Nintendo of Japan's resources stretched thin, no one at Nintendo of America ever ended up pushing for a Western release. Well, thanks to Sudgy, we can now finally play the game in English. So with that, let's jump into my time with Famicom Detective Club: The Missing Heir. The game starts with the main character waking up with a man staring down at him. The main character couldn't remember anything, and the man took the main character to his room, and from here on out, the game was played from a first-person perspective. The man introduced himself as Amachi, and after this, some options appeared. Like the other adventure games I've played so far, at any point there are a bunch of options to select from. I tried to see if I could remember anything, but I couldn't. After some investigation, I discovered that I had been found at a place called Unakami Cliff, and apparently I had fallen off and hurt my head. Then I headed back to the cliff to investigate. Oh boy, so in this game they brought back the mechanic from the Miho Nakayama game where you can use a cursor to investigate any part of the screen. I guess it does give you more to investigate, but let's just hope they don't go overboard with it. While I was investigating, I found a girl waving at me. She seemed to know who I was, and she was really concerned about me. Her name was Ayumi, and she said that we both came from the same detective agency. I went with her to the detective office, which was apparently called the Utsugi Detective Agency. Huh? Not the Famicom Detective Club? You know, that name made me think this game took place in a high school or something, but I guess I'm actually just a good old detective in this one. Apparently, I met with the owner of the agency when I was in middle school, and I was searching for my parents who I had been separated from. Ayumi said that I had gone to the cliff to meet with someone, but she didn't know who it was. After looking around the room, I found a note I had left behind that gave me a clue as to what I had been investigating. Myojin Village, Ayashiro. Well, I guess with nowhere else to go, maybe I can find out more about what I was doing if I go to Myojin Village. Before I left, Ayumi told me to remember my name and a text field opened up. So here you're supposed to enter your name, but that wasn't practical for Sudgy to implement, so he just hard-coded it so the game calls me Schmoby Dude. As I left to investigate, the title screen rolled and a mysterious phrase appeared on the screen. If anyone does wrong to the Ayashiro house, I, from the world of the dead, will come back to life and bring about the same disaster to them. The next scene took place at Myojin Station, which was at the village that I had written on the note. I talked to an attendant here, and he told me where to find the Ayashiro family. Apparently, they lived at the foot of a mountain. The attendant told me that their ancestors were the lords of this region, and that now they are some of the wealthiest people in Japan. I smell a motivation brewing. The attendant then said that he recognized me and exclaimed that I had already been to this village once before. I went to the Ayashiro estate and was greeted by a butler guy. So, because in Japan people often refer to each other with their last names, everyone's going to call me Dude in this game. Anyway, the butler seemed to recognize me, and he even said that he was worried about me. After explaining my amnesia to him, he reminded me that I was here to do an official investigation on the recent death of Kiku Ayashiro. The doctor said she died of heart failure, but the butler thought there was foul play. I had apparently left quickly after receiving an important phone call. I asked him some questions and he told me everything he knew. Kiku Ayashiro was the head of the Ayashiro company. She was 78 years old and her heart was weakening, so she just recently had written her will. Then, almost immediately after the will was read, she died in her room. He explained that there were 3 relatives present at the reading of the will, 2 nephews named Kanji and Jiro, and a niece, Azusa. Both of the brothers, Kanji and Jiro, run the Ayashiro company, with Kanji serving as the CEO and Jiro serving as the executive director. Azusa was the middle sibling of the 3, and she married into another family called the Kasuga family. So, something a bit rough I noticed during this scene was that I often had to reselect the same options multiple times to see new messages, but sometimes there was nothing new and it would repeat an old one. When this happened, there was no way to skip through the text, so I often got stuck having to scroll through the same messages over and over. It was really tedious. Anyway, next I went to investigate Kiku's room. Here, I learned that a housekeeper named Akane was the one who found her body. I also learned that the doctor who examined her body was named Dr. Kumada, and I decided to meet with him next. Hello Kumada, my name is Dude. Kumada said that while the timing was suspicious, he was certain that Kiku died of a normal illness. He also mentioned that Azusa, Kiku's niece, was at the clinic with a sore throat. I met Azusa soon after, and she told me that all 3 of the siblings were there on the night Kiku died. That's suspicious. Azusa got a bit defensive when I insinuated it was one of them. Kumada then told me that Kiku was buried at the nearby Kagura temple, so I went there next. Here, I found an old man named Genshin who told me about a legend in the village. When the head of the Ayashiro household dies with things left unresolved, it is said that they will rise from the grave and kill those that they resent. The legend spawned from an old story where an enemy of the Ayashiro household died a mysterious death after killing one of them. Spooky. Oh, also, this old guy was apparently close to Kiku. At this point, I wasn't really sure where to go, so I started traveling back to older places and asking a bunch of questions. Back in the village, one of the townspeople told me that the Ayashiro household had made many enemies over the years due to the fact that Kiku's late husband did many shady things. He allegedly even drove an entire family to commit suicide once. Eventually, after triggering a random conversation with the station attendant, I heard that Akane, the housekeeper, was back at the estate. Yeah, I'm not going to cover all of these, but sometimes you had to talk to just the right person at a random spot to make the next event occur. It could be pretty obtuse at times, and more than once during this game, I had to wander around the locations and talk to everyone to finally trigger the next piece of dialogue. Anyway, I met with Akane back at the estate, and she told me that she saw someone named Akira acting suspicious in the courtyard on the night the will was read. Akira was Kanji's son, so now we've added another member of the Ayashiro household into the mix. While investigating the room, I noticed a strange burn mark on the floor. I then received a phone call from Ayumi, who asked me to return to the office. So here, I reached a breakpoint. At certain parts throughout the game, you go back to Ayumi and summarize your findings so far. After discussing matters with her, she decided to investigate the Ayashiro company itself. Meanwhile, I went back to the estate to investigate some more. This time, Kanji, one of Kiku's nephews, was at the estate, so I decided to talk to him next. He was completely willing to spill the beans on the contents of the will, and they were quite strange. Kiku said that the Ayashiro company would go to the one with the symbol of the rightful heir of the Ayashiro family, Yuri Ayashiro. Huh? Who's that? Apparently, Yuri was Kiku's only daughter, but she ran away 20 years ago. I guess that's who the missing heir is, huh? Anyway, I kept pressing Kanji for more information. He wasn't even aware that Akira, his own son, was at the estate during the night of the will reading, which is definitely suspicious. Apparently, Kanji and Akira aren't on good terms, as Kanji said that Akira lives aimlessly with no job. Also, he accused Azusa pretty quickly, saying that she was in a lot of debt and was after Kiku's inheritance. He also seemed to hint that he wanted the company all to himself, but he quickly corrected himself to instead say that he and his brother would take care of it together. I'm starting to get the feeling that these siblings are at each other's throats here. Kanji exclaimed that since they were not the direct children of Kiku, he had no idea what the symbol of the rightful heir was, but if they weren't able to track down Yuri, the company would go to him and Jiro instead. I talked to the butler some more, and Kanji started smoking a bunch impatiently. Hey, it's not my fault I don't know what to do next. After wandering around a bunch, I managed to trigger some dialogue with the butler where he mentioned that Akira had been picked up by the police multiple times. That Akira guy is definitely suspicious. After this, I kinda got stuck again. I just kept having to see the same dialogue options again and again and again. Finally, I managed to trigger a message where Kanji told me about a lawyer named Kanda. He was the consultant for the Ayashiro family, and he helped Kiku make the will. He was another person there at the night of the will reading, and he was someone who Kiku trusted. Seeing this finally caused the scene to move forward as Kanji decided to leave, but I got stuck again. I tried all kinds of messages here, but apparently I just needed to ask the butler about what he knew. He simply told me to go back to the village and ask around about Yuri. Finding the correct message like this can be kind of tedious in this game. So I headed out to the village and I ended up going on a wild goose chase. A villager told me to go see Dr. Kumada, who told me to go see Genshin, and Genshin revealed that Yuri had fallen in love with the man that Kiku's husband didn't approve of, and that's why she ran away. I went back to the village and they started to freak out about the curse I had heard about before. They said that at the next full moon, the curse would cause another death. After returning to the estate, I found Azusa there, so I decided to question her some more, although she kept complaining about her sore throat. She told me that there was a power struggle between Kanji and Jiro at the company, with Kanji gaining more control after the death of Kiku. She was also aware of Akira's presence on the night of Kiku's death, and she even said that she caught Akira meeting with someone in secret. After pressing the butler about it some more, I learned that Akira had been holding a package while loitering around a storehouse on the other side of the estate that night. After finishing my investigation for the day, the butler told me that there was going to be a full moon that night. I chatted with Ayumi about the recent events, and after recapping everything, I realized I could travel to Amachi's house, which was kind of weird. If you remember, he's the guy who found me at the bottom of the cliff at the start of the game. Before moving on, I want to recap all the characters so far since we've heard about most of the important people now. Let's see, we've got myself, a man with amnesia, and I work alongside Ayumi at a detective agency. I was found by this Amachi guy, who I can now go and visit. As for the Ayashiro family, we have Kiku, the head, who recently passed away. She had a husband who also passed away sometime before her. They had a daughter named Yuri who ran off with a man 20 years ago, and she's the true heir of the Ayashiro company. Kiku was the aunt of 2 nephews and 1 niece. Kanji, the current CEO of the company, Jiro, the executive director, and Azusa, who's in a lot of debt. Kanji also has a playboy son named Akira who was acting suspicious on the night of the murder. Surrounding the Ayashiro family, we have the butler who called for the investigation, Akane, the housekeeper who found the body, Genshin, an old man who was close to Kiku, Kanda, a trusted lawyer who helped to create the will, and Dr. Kumada, who studied Kiku's body and determined the cause. Alright, got all that? Any prime suspects yet? Anyway, after going to Amachi's place, we chatted a bit about my circumstances, and Amachi pointed out how beneficial Kiku's death was to Kanji, the oldest brother. The game was laying it on Kanji a bit too thick at this point, which seemed like a red herring. As if an answer to my suspicions, we saw a sudden announcement on the TV. Kanji was murdered at the storehouse at the Ayashiro estate. I immediately ran to the scene to investigate the body. The forensic officer present told me that he had been stabbed in the chest with a knife, and the wound went all the way to his heart. He told me that it happened sometime between 10 and 11, and he was stabbed in the front with almost no conflict, suggesting it was an unexpected attack from someone he was comfortable with. I talked to the butler, and he said that the storehouse was locked tight at 11, which doesn't really line up with the time of death. However, when morning arrived, the lock was gone, and that's when the butler found the body. After this, I decided to take a closer look at Kanji. There he is, stabbed right in the chest. Pretty brutal for an old Nintendo game, huh? While I was investigating, I noticed a nearby key on the ground, and it was the storehouse key. When I analyzed Kanji's body, I noticed Kanji's eyes were wide open, almost as if he was pleading for something right before his death. Additionally, the wound was deep, suggesting that someone with a sturdy build performed the attack. I asked the butler about the key, and he said it was normally in Kiku's room inside a tobacco container. Apparently, Kiku used to smoke a lot, which was why her heart was in bad shape. She had quit smoking at the suggestion of Dr. Kumada and was using the tobacco container as a storage box. However, now the container was missing. I also interrogated Akane, the housekeeper, and she was acting really nervous and strange. I investigated the room some more and found out that there was another doorway in the storage room and this one was locked. I wonder where this leads. Anyway, the butler also noticed that several of the antiques were missing and suspected that this was all the work of a robber. After this, Jiro, the last of the three siblings, finally showed up. Understandably, he was distraught at the death of his brother, and I took him to the living room to ask him some questions. He seemed pretty mad at me whenever I tried to ask him anything, although to be fair, he did literally just find out his brother was murdered. When I asked him for an alibi, he brushed me off saying I had no right to ask about it. He also threw suspicion on some of the other family members. He said that it seemed likely that Akira would have been after the antiques in the storeroom, and since some of Azusa's debts were owed to Kanji, those debts were now annulled. Suddenly, Azusa showed up to defend herself, accusing Jiro of secretly being happy that Kanji was dead because of the pressure Kanji was applying at the company. Jiro got furious at this accusation and stormed off. I then talked to Azusa some more, and when I asked her for an alibi, she stormed off too. Dang, this whole family is suspicious. After this, I received a phone call from the police, and they told me that Akira's fingerprints were on the key. Because of this, they considered Akira to be the prime suspect and issued a warrant for his arrest. However, they found no fingerprints on the knife, which seemed suspicious considering that there were fingerprints on the key. Once again, Akira seemed a little bit too suspicious for me at this point, so I wasn't completely convinced. After meeting with the doctor and figuring out nothing, I randomly went to Kiku's grave again. Genshin was shocked when he heard the news about Kanji. My character pondered if Kiku actually did rise from the grave to get revenge, but Genshin brushed it off as superstition. At this point, I got stuck again, and the solution was kind of dumb. Back at Kumada's clinic, there was an x-ray in the corner that had a kind of silly message early on where my character freaked out about seeing a skeleton. For some reason, I had to try and take the x-ray at this particular point in the game to trigger a new conversation. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised I even found this out. This caused us to discuss my head injury randomly, and now I could travel to the cliff once more. I got stuck for a bit again, and I had to look at just the right spot to make a random old dude show up. He said that he was worried I was going to jump off, as this was a common place for suicides. He randomly told me that a woman comes here often, although he didn't say much else. What's the point of all this? Anyway, I went back to the office to talk with Ayumi again. She said that she would see if she could figure out who Akira was meeting with on the night of Kiku's murder, and that I should go to the Ayashiro company next to investigate. I went there the next day and started talking with some of the employees. They said that Jiro seemed hardly affected by the death of Kanji. Eventually, Jiro showed up, although he kept brushing off my questions. When I pressed him about Akira, he exclaimed that he didn't even care about the identity of his brother's killer since the deed had already been done. He thought I wanted to accuse him of instigating Akira to murder Kanji, but he said that I would need some sort of clear evidence to back up something like that. I went back to the village, and by now, the villagers were all freaking out. They were proclaiming that Kiku had resurrected and was the cause of the recent death, and that more were to follow. Someone even said they saw her rise from the grave. After going back to the estate, a new character was introduced, Kaori Ayashiro, Kanji's wife. She was shocked by her husband's death, and she insisted that Akira, their son, could not be the murderer. She begged me to find Akira since he was all she had left. She gave me a picture of Akira, and my character exclaimed that his face seemed strangely familiar. After this, Ayumi called with some info. She found one of the stolen antiques in a nearby town, and the age of the seller was around the same age as Akira. Not only that, but Akira was seen with a 40-year-old man in a car soon before the death of Kiku. Was this the same man Akira met with at the estate on the day the will was read? Anyway, I went to the doctor after this and discovered some strange news. At the time of the stabbing, Kanji was already dead. They couldn't figure out the real cause of death though, as no other injuries were found. Also, Kumada for some reason noticed that my shirt was too small, so I decided to see if Amachi lent it to me while I was unconscious. Back at Amachi's house, he told me that the shirt was his cousin's, as mine was dirty and he sent it to the dry cleaners. This guy's role in the story is really weird. There has to be a reason for all of this, right? He seemed to enjoy helping me with my investigation, and he had a bunch of mystery novels on a bookshelf. Maybe he's just a mystery enthusiast? It could be that he has some connection to my missing memories, as that seems to be the only plot point he's even connected to. Anyway, I got stuck talking to him for a while, and finally after saying each message multiple times, a random dialogue triggered where he suggested I go back to the cliff again. However, after going there, I found nothing, and I had to talk to Amachi a bunch again to finally trigger the next message. The story is interesting, but figuring out where to go next can be really annoying. Finally, Amachi said that while I was unconscious, I was muttering something about an amulet. That's the first I've heard about this. After going back to the cliffs, I found a random woman there. Her name was Yukiko, and she was waiting for her lover. They apparently promised years ago that they would meet here at this cliff. The man's name was Kazuto Ayashiro. Wait, there's another Ayashiro family member? Who the heck is this guy? Apparently, he lived in a neighboring town, and after his mother died, he left, saying he would become a lawyer. Could this be related to Kanda, the Ayashiro family lawyer? I went back to the Ayashiro estate to ask about this mysterious new person. The butler said that Kazuto was Yuri's brother. Sort of. Kazuto wasn't actually Kiku's son. Rather, Kiku's husband had a mistress who was the mother of Kazuto. Kiku's husband let Kazuto and his mother live on the estate, but after Kiku's husband died, Kiku distanced herself from Kazuto, and Kazuto and his mother eventually left the estate. His whereabouts were now unknown. After this, I returned to the detective agency where Ayumi revealed a whole bunch more info about Akira. Akira owed money to the Yakuza, but recently all of his debts were mysteriously being paid. Additionally, just before Kiku died, Akira told his friends that he was going to become the CEO of the Ayashiro company. Okay, let's do some quick updates to our character list. Let's see, Kanji is now dead, and we've officially met Jiro, his brother. We've also now learned about Kazuto Ayashiro, Yuri's half-brother, and he has a childhood lover who is waiting for him. Anyway, as I was talking with Ayumi, we received a sudden phone call. It was from the butler. Something terrible had happened. He had urgent news about Jiro. However, before I heard what the news was, Disc 1 officially ended. I guess if you bought this at launch, you had to wait a few months to see the conclusion, but that's no problem for me. When I loaded up the next disc, I was quickly greeted by something quite disturbing. Jiro was hanging from a tree in the nearby mountains. At this point, the police presumed it was a suicide. The death appeared to have happened sometime right after midnight, and once again, it was the butler who found him in the morning. I talked to Azusa here, and she immediately expected foul play, saying that this wasn't something Jiro would do. She suspected that Akira was the killer, and she was worried that she was going to be targeted next. I also talked to the butler, and he said that Jiro suddenly showed up at the estate the night before, and he left without being able to find something that he was looking for. He also said that yesterday, Akane, the housekeeper, answered a call from Kanda, the lawyer. Curious about this, I decided to head back to the estate and ask her about it. Akane confirmed that she did indeed take a call from Kanda's office, and she also mentioned that Azusa left the estate soon after Jiro. I then decided to call Kanda's office myself, and I heard from a secretary that Jiro apparently visited Kanda last night after leaving the estate. I decided to head over to Kanda's office to investigate. His secretary told me that Kanda was out for the day, although I learned that recently Kanda was fervently searching for a file related to an old case. I tried to take a look at the file myself, but the secretary just shooed me away. After this, I went back to the village and whoa, the picture changed. I guess they just made a bunch of new scenes for Disc 2. Once again, the people were freaking out about the curse. Everyone was saying that Kiku's ghost was now haunting the town and was responsible for all of these deaths. After getting a picture of Jiro from Akane, I was able to show it to Kanda's secretary to get more info. Jiro did indeed visit Kanda's office yesterday, and she said that Kanda and Jiro left together after talking for a long time. She said their conversation was lively, and the ashtray was full of cigarette butts. I went to see Dr. Kumada after this, and he said that after investigating the body, it was decided that Jiro's death was indeed a suicide after all. However, my character thought it was a bit strange since Jiro's life was actively getting better just before his death. I also asked about Azusa, and Kumada commented that by quitting smoking, her throat seemed to be getting better. Man, every single person in the family seems to have a history with smoking. After this, I learned that Akane, the housekeeper, took some time off and left for her parents' house, and then I went back to the agency to discuss matters with Ayumi. She said that she hadn't been able to figure out who Akira was traveling with in the car that day, but she decided to use the picture of Jiro I got to investigate if the mysterious man was Jiro. After this, I just started asking around for more clues. Dr. Kumada left suddenly for important business, the town was in a state of full-on panic, Genshin seemed troubled by something, and the butler was useless despite how many questions I could ask him. After pressing Genshin some more, I got him to accidentally reveal that there was previously a bloodstain near Kiku's grave. I pressed him some more, and he said that he found it just before Kanji's murder, but he quietly cleaned it since he didn't want to cause an uproar surrounding the legends of the Ayashiro family. Well, everyone in the town is freaking out about it already, so it's kind of too late for that. Anyway, he said that at the time he also found a hand mirror, which he let me take. On the back, it had a drawing of a reverse swastika, also known as the Manji symbol, and each point faced an animal: a rabbit, a bird, a mouse, and a horse. Geez, what on earth is this going to be used for? I took this mirror to the butler, and he said it was Kiku's favorite hand mirror. But here's the catch: it was placed in Kiku's grave when she was buried. He also told me that last night he heard a strange noise in the house, but when he went to investigate, he couldn't find anyone. Man, they're really playing up this ghost story possibility, aren't they? Anyway, for some reason, I was able to go to the cliff after this, but I couldn't find anything there. I also noticed I could go back to see Amachi again, the guy who found me at the start. I always found it a bit strange that I could visit him, so I went there next. He didn't even tell me anything useful other than the fact that he was soon leaving for work-related business. Man, just why is this guy still in the story? It must be related to my memories or something. After returning to the estate, another new character got introduced, but man, they really did her dirty with this sprite. This lady was a childhood friend of Yuri, and she gave me a picture of Yuri to help me identify her. She also said she received a postcard from Yuri once that revealed she had moved to a place called Yotsuka. I wanted to go to Yotsuka, but I didn't have the option, and I got stuck here for a bit. I just had to talk with Genshin a ton and ask unrelated question after unrelated question. It was kind of obnoxious because with each message it wasn't clear what changed, so I just had to keep asking him everything over and over. Anyway, I tried suggesting we dig up Kiku's grave, but Genshin insisted that we shouldn't do it. He also told me that Kiku regretted driving out Kazuto, Yuri's half-brother, and Genshin wondered if Kazuto held a grudge against Kiku. After triggering a bunch more random messages with him, that random old guy was back at the cliffs and he just started trolling me. He had a secret that he refused to tell me. I also kept asking about the amulet I murmured about while unconscious, and each time he misheard me and thought I was talking about other things like an ambulance and an omelet. Then, when he finally did understand me, he had no idea what it even was. Eventually, by praising him and calling him handsome, he finally revealed his secret. He told me that Yukiko, that random woman who was waiting for Kazuto on the cliff, comes by every day at 5. After taking forever to realize I just needed to talk to the lady back at the estate to magically make it 5 o'clock, I went back to the cliffs and found Yukiko again. I asked about Kazuto, and she revealed that after receiving a letter one day, Kazuto had strong feelings that the law was inconsistent. After Yukiko left, it finally gave me the option to travel to Yotsuka where Yuri lived. Right when I arrived, I found a man, but he said he was in a hurry and quickly left. I wonder if this is someone I've heard about before but haven't seen yet. Kanda the lawyer? Kazuto the missing son? Akira the rebellious son of Kanji? Oh, he could also be Yuri's husband, considering that she does live here after all. Anyway, I tried talking to this old lady about Yuri, but the conversation was going nowhere, so I decided to just head back to the detective agency and talk with Ayumi again. Ayumi said that the person Akira was with in the car was definitely not Jiro. In fact, it was someone younger than either of the Ayashiro brothers. Once again, that mostly just singles out Kanda, Kazuto, and Yuri's husband. Or, you know, some complete stranger. Speaking of, Ayumi revealed that with the death of both Kanji and Jiro, Kanda, the legal consultant, had taken charge of the company. When I inquired about Kanda to the butler, he pointed out that Kanda and Kazuto were about the same age. You know, I did hear that Kazuto wanted to be a lawyer. Could he and Kanda be the same person? Anyway, after talking to the villagers a bunch, I ended up meeting a guy who apparently saw Jiro the night before he died. The villager said that he saw Jiro with another person, and one of them seemed so drunk that they were being dragged along. So at this point while I was playing, I had basically solved who the killer was, at least partially. I knew which of the characters it was, but there were still some mysteries to unravel. However, I don't want to spoil it yet, so I'm gonna wait before I tell you who I thought it was. After this, I found out from the butler that Yuri's friend gave us the postcard from Yuri that had her direct address. I wanted to go there next, but apparently Dr. Kumada had recently returned, so I had to go there first. Kumada had a serious look on his face, and he said that he went back to the police to perform a second autopsy on Jiro's body. He discovered that there was something he had missed. Jiro had traces of cyanide on his middle and index fingers. This seemed to suggest that he might have been poisoned, but since it was only found on his fingers, there was no indication that it was the actual cause of his death. At this point, Dr. Kumada got a taste of the detective spirit, and he decided to head off to the newspaper company to look into other murder cases involving cyanide. Once he left, I headed off to Yotsuka to see if I could find Yuri. When I started talking with the old lady again, I discovered something terrible. Yuri died in a fire 17 years ago. Dang, so I guess the missing heir was just dead the whole time? Wait, apparently Yuri had a baby that she saved before being burned? Maybe that's the missing heir then. Who on earth could that be? Anyway, the old lady said that the baby was taken in by someone named Sawako Yamamoto, and curiously, a well-dressed man also recently asked about Yamamoto, so I went to visit her house next. I met a lady there who my character thought looked familiar, and this was Sawako's daughter, Motoko. She said that her mother ran an orphanage and was indeed the one who looked after Yuri's child, but Sawako had recently passed away. Motoko said that while the child did survive the fire, they received a pretty bad burn mark on their shoulder. I mentioned that she looked familiar, but Motoko insisted we had never met before. That was all the information I could get out of her, so I went back to the detective agency to discuss matters with Ayumi once more. Alright, let's do another update to our character list. It turns out Yuri died in a fire a long time ago. She had a baby that survived the fire who was raised by a woman named Sawako, and Sawako had a daughter named Motoko. This unnamed child of Yuri apparently has a burn mark on their shoulder. So at this point, I basically realized who the missing heir was, but I'll leave it a secret for now if you haven't figured it out yet. Anyway, after discussing matters with Ayumi, I headed back to Dr. Kumada to see if he figured out anything about the cyanide. However, when I reached the newspaper company, Dr. Kumada was hunched over and he wasn't responding to my calls. Oh no, not another death. Just kidding. This was all a fake out, as Dr. Kumada had simply fallen asleep. Man, it even played the death music and everything. Anyway, here I learned that mixing cyanide with certain chemicals and adding heat will create cyanide gas, and poisoning via cyanide gas is really hard to detect. The only way we could prove Jiro died from cyanide poisoning would be to find out exactly how he inhaled it. In particular, Kumada was curious about what it was doing exclusively on Jiro's middle and index fingers. Alright, at this point I also figured out how the deaths were carried out, but once again, I'll leave it alone for now if you haven't figured it out. After this, Kumada was apparently curious about Yukiko at the cliffs, but when he went there we found something terrible. A woman's body was floating in the sea. We went down to the beach and discovered that it was Azusa, the last of the 3 siblings. However, her death didn't seem to be caused by the cyanide at all, as she appeared to have been strangled to death. Also, when I checked her nails, there was evidence that she was violently scratching someone. After talking with some nearby villagers, one of them said that he saw Azusa being followed by a man who often visited the Ayashiro estate. At this point, I went back to the estate and the butler's hopes were pretty low. All the Ayashiro family members were dying. Even the mysterious Yuri was gone too. If only we knew who her child was. This part was pretty tricky. The butler didn't want to talk at all anymore, and I had to select the option titled Stop Investigating, which was usually used to quit the game. Instead, this time, it caused my character to snap the butler out of it by threatening to stop the investigation. Then, after investigating the room, I found a note left by Azusa that she wrote while on the phone. It said, Unakami Cliff, 11:30. Akira's not involved. The inheritance is about to be distributed. Yuri's child was found. After this, I received a call from Dr. Kumada. Akane, the housekeeper, was at the clinic and she wanted to tell me something. When I went there, she confessed that she killed Kiku. Or so she thought. She said that Kiku didn't actually quit smoking, as Akane was still giving Kiku tobacco in secret. She blamed herself for Kiku's death and hid the tobacco container and pipe somewhere. This was why she was acting so suspicious earlier. However, now we know that there's more to this story. We assured her that the smoking was not actually the cause of her death, so she wasn't responsible. Alright, at this point I had to officially deduce how Kiku, Kanji, and Jiro were all murdered. There was a text field here where you had to enter the answer. Again, due to the limitations of Sudgy's Lua script, I just had to enter the answer in Japanese, but my assumptions at this point were completely correct. If you haven't figured it out yet, they were all poisoned via cyanide-laced tobacco. All 3 were heavy smokers, and there were indications that all 3 were smoking before they died. We saw Kanji smoking the night before he was killed, we heard that Jiro was smoking at the law office, and Kiku was still smoking in secret. Additionally, the cyanide traces on Jiro's fingers lined up with the fingers people often use to smoke cigarettes. Azusa wasn't poisoned this way because she had recently stopped smoking. Anyway, after this, we decided to dig up Kiku's body so that we could check if she had cyanide poisoning too. However, when we dug up the grave, Kiku's body was nowhere to be found. Instead, we found Akira's body. Dang, so this guy's already been dead for a while now too. No wonder we never saw him throughout the game. He had been smashed in the head with the tombstone, which was why there were blood marks on it. In fact, the corpse was so old that it was clear he died before Kanji even, so there was no way he killed his own father. However, seeing Akira's face triggered something else: my memory. Akira was the one who attacked me on the cliff before I lost my memories. So, at this point, I went back to Ayumi and we deduced that a certain someone was using Akira to sneak cyanide into Kiku's tobacco. Since Akira was indeed guilty, he attacked me at the cliff when I was coming to investigate. However, there was clearly another person in this story. Who was the man that Akira was meeting? Who was the one that killed Akira? Suddenly, we received a phone call from Kumada, who found out about another murder case involving tobacco. It was a story about a woman who cashed in on a life insurance policy on her husband who had recently died of a supposed heart failure. In fact, the lawyer on this case was someone I had heard about already. Alright, here was basically where I had to deduce who the killer was. If you haven't figured it out yet, it's Kanda, the Ayashiro family lawyer who we haven't even seen yet. A bit strange they made the killer someone whose face we haven't seen. Anyway, I pretty much knew it was Kanda ever since I heard that Jiro was out late with Kanda the night before he died. If you remember, the secretary said the ashtray was full of cigarettes that night too. At this point, I was pretty confident about something else related to Kanda, but once again, I don't want to spoil it. Before pressing deeper into Kanda though, I decided to investigate the cliffs once more since everything still didn't quite add up. If Akira was serious about killing me, why didn't I actually die that day? Well, I didn't figure out anything there, so I decided to head back to the estate. Back here, Akane pulled out the tobacco container she had hidden and I started to investigate. Inside, I found a note that said, "The horse advances, the rabbit advances, the bird opens. Seek the symbol inside the swastika." This reminds me of the drawing on the back of the mirror. Strange. After this, I got stuck for a while again. I could go to a lot of places, so it wasn't clear where my next objective was. I kept trying to get the file from Kanda's secretary, but she wouldn't let me have it. I started to just search around for a bit, and Genjin told me more about Kanda's past. Remember early on when I heard a story about Kiku's husband drawing an entire family to suicide? Well, it turns out that was Kanda's parents, and Kiku hired Kanda as a way to atone for her husband's sins. I guess that explains why Kanda has it out for the Ayashiro family. Anyway, back at Kanda's office, I harassed the secretary so much that she called the police on me, but since they knew who I was, they were able to convince her to give me the file. This file apparently spilled all the beans on that old case, including the method of murder, and it majorly incriminated Kanda. Honestly, I'm kinda surprised he kept this thing around all this time. This next part was nasty. I could travel between the cliffside and Amachi's room back and forth, but there didn't seem to be anything interesting. In the end, what I had to do was investigate anywhere on this map over 10 times, then travel to Amachi's apartment, then back to the cliffs, which caused time to pass, then I had to go back to Amachi's apartment. Yeesh, this game could be so obtuse at times. Here, I found an employee of the dry cleaner that Amachi went to. This stranger had my clothes, and they said they were drenched with seawater. Here's the thing though, Amachi said he found me on the grass and that he was cleaning my shirt simply because it was dirty. What was I doing out in the sea? I went back to Ayumi to discuss everything, and she noticed a button came off the shirt and sewed it back on. I decided to put my shirt on right then and there, much to the shock of a flustered Ayumi. However, when we took my shirt off, we found something crucial. A burn mark on my shoulder. Hold on, didn't Yuri's child have a burn mark on their shoulder? After this, I went back to Motoko to confirm everything. That's right, the main character was indeed the son of Yuri. The whole time I, the player, was the missing heir. I pretty much figured this one out back when I first met Motoko, since the main character said she looked familiar, and the fact that the main character had amnesia at the start made me think he must have been involved in the story somehow. Also, the strange plotline with Amachi and the shirt made me suspicious that I did indeed have the burn mark, since it just seemed kind of weird to talk about my shirt so much. Motoko showed me a picture of her mother alongside a younger version of me, and the similarities between Motoko and her mother were why I thought she looked familiar. Motoko then told me the story of my parents. My father was a man named Takao Toyama. One day, he was helping someone who was being assaulted, and in the process, my father ended up killing one of the assailants. While most people thought it was self-defense, the man murdered was the son of someone with a lot of influence, and my father was branded as a murderer and sent to prison, where he eventually died. To make matters worse, the fire that ended up killing Yuri was caused by the friends of the man who my father killed. Motoko's mother, who took me in, decided to hide the fact that I was Yuri's child because she didn't want me to grow up being called the son of a murderer, which is why I never knew who my parents were. There was also a doll from my mother that I had taken with me. When I went back to the office, it turned out that the doll was sitting there on the shelf the whole time. Upon holding it, my memories all came back to me. Inside the doll was a key and a note, directing me to Kiku to discover who I truly was. After this, I went back to the estate, and I had to deduce where this key went. I correctly remember the locked door in the storehouse way earlier in the game, and after entering the text, I went there. Upon opening the door, I was taken to a massive maze. What the heck? This suddenly became a dungeon crawler. After a while, I decided to start mapping out the maze. It's a bit hard to tell from my crude drawings, but this was basically the Manji symbol I heard about earlier, and I could find all of the animal symbols on the walls at certain dead ends. I pressed up against these animals in the order provided by the paper, and a secret room opened up in the center. In here, I finally found the amulet I had mentioned forever ago, which was the symbol of the heir. However, suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared before me. It was Amachi, the man who found me at the cliff. He had a fresh scar on his face from his conflict with Azusa. That's right, Amachi and Kanda were the same person. This reveal was another one I called a while ago, although in retrospect, some of it was kind of for the wrong reasons. I was pretty suspicious of Amachi early on, since I found his role in the story really bizarre. The mistake I made was that I assumed in Kanda's call to Azusa, the line where he said that he found the missing heir was a reference to me, and I figured since Amachi was the only one who could have seen the burn mark when he changed my shirt previously, Amachi and Kanda had to be the same person. It turns out there was a subplot I glossed over where Kanda set up a fake heir to take my place, and that was who he was referring to in the phone call. In reality, Amachi knew who I was from the very start. Some real clues though were the fact that Amachi lied to me about how he found me at the start of the game, and that Amachi conveniently goes on a business trip right around the same time Azusa goes missing and ends up dead. Anyway, like any good mystery villain, he revealed everything to me. He did indeed convince Akira to lace Kiku's tobacco with cyanide in exchange for paying off his debts. He then revealed how he was the one who killed each of the other family members and pinned the blame on Akira. Even the fact that I was investigating this case was no coincidence. He researched Yuri and discovered that I was her son, and specifically baited me into this case. He wanted to use me to find this secret room. However, Akira acted on his own accord and almost killed me, but Kanda found me just in time to rescue me. Now that I found the secret room though, Kanda had no more reason to keep me alive. He held up a knife and the screen suddenly went black and I heard the sounds of conflict. When I could see again, the man I saw briefly in Yatsuka was there holding Kanda in place, and the police arrived soon after. The man was Kazuto, my half-uncle and brother of Yuri. He revealed that Yuri had explained everything in a letter to him before she passed, and when Kazuto saw that I was being taken care of, he decided to let me be. In fact, the tragic situation surrounding my parents was what inspired Kazuto to become a lawyer. Once he discovered that I was investigating the Ayashiro estate, he became worried, which is how he eventually found the path in the storehouse. Kazuto said that I was to be the heir of the Ayashiro estate, but my character turned it down, instead giving the amulet to Kazuto. My character said he was not Shimobi Ayashiro, but Shimobi Toyama, the son of Takao and Yuri. My character said that the past he had almost forgotten and his memories of his mother were far more important to him. With that, the game ended and the credits rolled, while a picture of Yuri appeared in the corner. With that, Famicom Detective Club, The Missing Heir, was complete. Now, before my review, let's finish up the character page for completion's sake. It turns out the man we saw in Yatsuka was actually Kazuto, and now he has become the one in charge of the Ayashiro company. Amachi and Kanda turned out to be the same person, and he was the one behind all of the murders. Finally, I, the player, was the son of Yuri, meaning I was the missing heir the whole time. Alright, let's move on to the review. Wow, I know I said something similar in my review of New Onigashima, but this was definitely a whole side of Nintendo that we never got to see back during the NES days. This is very different from the kind of games we knew them for in the West. Now, let's talk about the game itself. Honestly, I've got quite mixed feelings on this one. Let me start with the positives. Overall, I like the story of Famicom Detective Club. It's a fun mystery, even if some of the answers become a bit easy due to how many of the prime suspects get killed throughout the game. This may depend on what kind of mystery stories you like, but I enjoyed being able to discover this one on my own before the reveals, and it's fun that there were multiple mysteries to solve in addition to just discovering who the killer is. Side note, but Sudgy was so caught up in the translating with this one that he didn't solve anything while he was working on the game. He ended up being pretty jealous that I solved it all before he did. Now, unfortunately, the puzzle-solving aspects of this one were not great. There was just so much talking to the same people over and over, trying out each option again and again just to find one single message that was changed. This would have been alleviated a bit if there was some way to skip text you've already seen, but as it stands, discovering what to do next was just so tedious in this game. In fact, I think New Onigashima was notably better in this regard. That one was still pretty obtuse at times, but I enjoyed the puzzle solving way more in it. Sometimes this problem messed with the pacing of the story too. There were a few times where it became really unclear what I was even supposed to investigate next, and I just had to wander around until I conveniently stumbled upon some new info. So while I did enjoy the overall story, the tedious puzzle solving really holds this one back. Some people might be able to overlook it for the sake of the story, but for me, if a game doesn't handle the interactive components well, then a good story is not completely enough to save it for me. That being said, I wouldn't even call this a bad game, as I still ultimately enjoyed playing it, but it definitely could have been so much more. I gave Famicom Detective Club The Missing Heir a 6 out of 10. With Famicom Detective Club complete, I have now finished 73 out of the 155 NES games in the challenge, meaning I am now 47.1% of the way through all of the NES games. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.